The alarm hit before I even had my boots on. Red light filled the corridor, and the whole ship shook so hard I fell against the wall. Someone was screaming over the comm system, and it was not a drill. My name is Lena Marsh, and I was second officer on a small trade ship called the Wandering Star. We carried scrap metal and old parts between quiet stations, far from any war. Nothing ever happened to us. That was the whole point of the job. Safe, slow, boring. Until that day. 3 unmarked ships dropped out of nowhere in the middle of a debris field we were crossing. No warning, no signal. Just weapons fire tearing into our hull before our captain, a tall woman named Grace Doyle, could even give an order. The lights in the control room flashed and died, then came back weaker. Sparks fell from a broken panel near my head. I heard Grace shouting for someone to get to the pilot seat, because our regular pilot had been thrown across the room and could not stand. That was when Daniel Mercer walked in. Daniel was the quietest man on the ship. He kept to himself, fixed small things nobody asked him to fix, and always seemed a little tired. He was polite to everyone, remembered small details about people's lives, and never once raised his voice. If you asked the crew to describe him, most people would say the word ordinary. Nothing about him stood out. He blended into every room he entered. He sat down at the controls without saying a word, and something in his face changed. It was small, but I noticed it. His eyes went sharp. His hands moved fast, faster than I had ever seen a person move. "Hold on to something," he said calmly, like he was asking someone to pass the salt at dinner. Then the ship moved. I do not know how else to describe it. 1 second, we were sitting still, an easy target. The next second the ship spun through a gap in the wreckage so narrow, I was sure we would break apart. Daniel was not just avoiding fire, he was using the broken metal around us as cover, sliding between pieces of wreckage like he already knew exactly where every piece was going to be. Grace grabbed the back of a chair and stared at him. "Where did you learn to fly like this?" He did not answer. He was too busy pulling us through a turn that pressed me flat against the floor. One of the enemy ships tried to follow us into a tight gap between 2 broken station arms. Daniel let it get close, then pulled up at the last second. The enemy ship clipped the wreckage instead and spun off course, its engines sputtering out. "One down," Grace whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The second ship came in fast from above. Daniel rolled us hard to the side, and for one long second I was staring straight down into open space, with nothing holding me but my seatbelt. My stomach dropped. Then the ship leveled again, and Daniel fired a short burst that clipped the enemy ship's wing. It spun away, trailing smoke, and did not come back. That was when the ship's old computer system made a small sound, like it had found something. A file appeared on the main screen, one that had been hidden under years of updates and covered records. It showed a name, Daniel Mercer. Next to it was a rank and a unit number that made Grace go very still. "That cannot be right," she said quietly. I looked at the screen too. I did not understand all of it, but I understood enough. There had been a story, years ago, about a small ship that held off a much bigger force long enough for hundreds of people to escape a dying station. Nobody knew the pilot's name. The records had been sealed. People talked about it like a legend, something too big to be true. Now here it was, sitting quietly on our screen, next to a man who spent his free time fixing loose wires and asking if anyone wanted tea. The third ship was the most dangerous. It was bigger than the other 2, with heavier weapons, and it was closing in fast. Daniel's hands never stopped moving. He guided us through a spinning field of broken metal, using pieces of old station wreckage as a shield, again and again. Every time the enemy ship lined up a clear shot, Daniel had already moved us somewhere else. "I need everyone quiet for a moment," he said, and his voice was steady, almost gentle. Nobody said a word. He waited until the enemy ship pushed in close, chasing us through a narrow path between 2 large pieces of broken hull. Then, at the last second, Daniel cut our engines and let us drop. The enemy ship shot past us, unable to slow down fast enough, and crashed straight into the very wreckage it thought it could avoid. Its lights went dark, and it drifted away, powerless. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the ship's systems humming back to normal power. My hands were shaking. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my own ears. Daniel let out a slow breath and leaned back in his seat. Just like that, the sharpness left his eyes, and he looked tired again, the same quiet man who had walked into the room minutes earlier. Grace stared at him for a long moment. "Why did you never tell us?" He rubbed his hands over his face before answering. "Because once people know what you can do, they stop seeing you as a person. They only see what happened. I did not want that. I wanted to be someone who fixes broken pipes and makes bad coffee. I wanted to be boring." Nobody laughed, even though under any other circumstances, it might have been funny. "You saved all of us," I said. "That is not something to hide." He shook his head slowly. "I am not hiding a gift. I am trying to leave behind something I do not want to carry every day. That fight, all those years ago, cost more than anyone talks about. I do not want to be defined by one bad day, even if it turned out the way it did." Grace placed a hand on his shoulder. "Nobody here is going to make you talk about it. But we are grateful you were here today." Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "Let us just say I got lucky with old habits." Over the next few hours, the ship's systems finished repairing what they could, and the crew worked together clearing damage and checking on each other. Nobody brought up the hidden file again, at least not out loud, but I noticed how people looked at him differently, not with fear, but with a quiet kind of respect that did not need words. Later that night, I found him sitting alone near a window, looking out at the stars. I sat down next to him, not saying anything at first. "You did not have to save us the way you did," I finally said. "You could have just gotten us out safely. Instead, you stopped every single one of them." He was quiet for a moment. If I had only run, they would have followed. Someone else would have found us later, maybe when we were not ready. Sometimes the only way to keep people safe is to finish the problem completely, not just delay it. I nodded slowly, understanding what he meant, even if it was a hard truth to sit with. "Will you tell the others the whole story someday?" I asked. He looked at the stars for a long moment before answering. "Maybe, when they are ready to hear it as a story, not as a title. I do not want to be Daniel the war hero. I want to be Daniel who fixes the water system and remembers everyone's birthday." I smiled at that, because it was such a simple thing to want, and yet it made complete sense coming from him. Word of what happened never spread far outside our small ship. There was no medal, no announcement, no crowd of people cheering his name. Just a quiet crew, grateful to be alive, going back to their normal routines the next day. But something had changed. When new people joined our ship in the following months, and someone joked about the old legend of the pilot from years ago, none of us laughed anymore. We simply said that if they ever needed him, he would be there. And we hoped, deep down, that they never would. As for me, I never forgot that day. Not the fear, not the shaking in my hands, and not the calm, steady voice of a man everyone thought was ordinary. I learned that day that the quietest people often carry the heaviest stories, and that true strength does not always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits quietly in the corner, fixing broken pipes, waiting for the one moment when it is needed most. And when that moment came, Daniel Mercer did not hesitate. He simply did what he had always known how to do, then went back to being the calm, ordinary man we all thought we knew. That was the real lesson I carried with me long after that day. Ordinary is often just a name we give to someone who has already been through everything, and chosen peace anyway.